It's like I'm almost.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Living Seas live talk. And as you know, if you've watched the last three, we're discussing topics that we will think will be really interesting to you, of course. They're projects that we're working on. We're highlighting challenges and issues that we feel are really important at a time when there's so much going on and we really need to look after our wildlife. So really happy to have so many of you on this live stream this evening. Great to have you with us. My name's Bex Lynham. I'm the Marine Advocacy Officer for the North Sea Wildlife Trust. So that's basically all of the trusts in between Northumberland and Suffolk. And it's my role to advocate for marine conservation measures on behalf of those trusts. And behind the scenes is Anna. Anna, give us a wave. I've got to make her give us a wave because otherwise she will just hide and she'll get no credit for all the work that she's put in because she's the mastermind of the whole series. In terms of technicalities for this evening, same as before, we are, of course, streaming live on YouTube. You can add your questions into the chat function at any point. Please do add them while our speaker's talking. That'd be great. So we've got them lined up when he's finished. If anything goes wrong whatsoever, sometimes internet speeds are poor. If someone drops out for a couple of minutes, just bear with us and we'll get things back up and running as soon as possible. If we don't pop back up again, then clearly we couldn't rectify the issues, but we will record the talk and make it available for you to watch at a later date. So yeah, in a moment, I'm going to hand over to our speaker. He's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have plenty of time to ask him all of your questions that you've sent through. So without further ado, I'll introduce Andy Mason from Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. He's going to talk to us about Spurn through the ages. And Andy's been part of the team at Yorkshire Wildlife Trust for over 6.5 years, and he's got a wealth of knowledge about Spurn Point. So without further ado, over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Bex, and thank you very much for inviting me along to speak tonight. I'm really excited about this, and hopefully take you on a journey through time, a maritime journey along Spurn. So really, what I need to do now is introduce a bit. I'll just start up my so I share my screen. Let's put this in here. Like that. Okay. We'll get started.
Looking good, Andy.
Right, yeah. Okay, Spurn. A lot of people know Spurn. A lot of people don't. It's a finger of land which projects out from the south of the Holderness coast out into the mouth of the Humber estuary. It's an amazing place for wildlife, but also it has an amazing history as well. And I'll take you on a journey through that and see what we can find out. So I'll start off. This one just taking its time to there you go. All right. So here's a map of Spurn, and it's a peninsula. It's 3.5 miles long, formed by processes of coastal erosion and deposition, and it's been around for a long time. It comes out from the Holderness coast, which is on East Yorkshire. Around here, this is the Narrow Neck and what we call now the Washover. Talk about that later. Down to the Lighthouse, a place called Chalk Bank. This place here is called Old Den. This is Greedy Gut. And we have the lifeboat houses. The RNLI have a lifeboat stationed at Spurn. There's the lifeboat there. And the area has about 700 acres in total. It's owned by Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and managed as a national nature reserve. So Spurn's had a long history, and it's actually its first mention was way back in the 7th century when it was had a monastery on it. But before that, you have it was part of Europe. It was actually joined to Europe, as was the whole of the UK via Doggerland. Doggerland was formed at the end of the last ice age, and it was this huge sort of Eden area, a great low-lying area, which over thousands of years, up to 8,000 years ago, filled in and became the North Sea, and all this land disappeared. But the structures that we find now on the coast are as a result of the ice age that formed all this area. And we now find things on Spurn which are from that time. This is a mammoth tusk which was washed up at Spurn back in 2008, and it's around about 50,000 years old, so older than the Ice Age time, but of an Ice Age period, and it's one of the largest tusks found on the East Coast. So these animals actually roamed Doggerland in that time, and it's wonderful to find things like this. We find fossils and all sorts of things at Spurn, but it's one of the earliest things, and it shows you that there was some amazing megafauna that used to sort of roam around Spurn. After this time, we've got moving into recorded history. I've said about the 7th century, and that was when there was a monastery on Spurn, and a gentleman called Wilgils was an old landed gentry. He decided to become a monk, a hermit, and his son Willibrord took Christianity across to the Frisians, across to Belgium and the Netherlands. We get a lot of people coming back to Spurn to ask about the origins of Wilgils. He was a missionary, and he actually was on the end of Spurn. Spurn at that time in the 7th century was called Cornu Vallis, which roughly translated means horn at the end of the valley, which, considering it's at the end of the Humber estuary, it fits quite right. It looks like a horn. It's got that shape. So moving on, we have into the medieval times, the early medieval times. You've got the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and Harold Hardrada was beaten fair and square at that battle. His forces, his Norwegian army, what was left of them, actually got together on Spurn. Now, Spurn at that time was called Hrafnseer. Hrafnseer, roughly translated, means sandbank of the raven's tongue, and that again describes it really well. Hickel's sagas of the 950s, they mention Hrafnseer, and then later on Spon. So we got Spon, and there's the origins of the word Spurn starting to come through. It was what kind of not mentioned until 1066, when 1086, when the Domesday Book mentioned a small settlement of Ravensor. And Ravensor was a village, and it became Ravenspurn. And also later on into the 1230s, developed into quite a medieval port called Ravensor Odd. So Spurn had a port on it at that time, and it rivaled the likes of Grimsby and Hull. So there's this, but the problem with Spurn is that it moves and wriggles and is washed away at times, pushed back at times, and that's what happened to this medieval port. It eventually was abandoned by the 1350s. So moving on, we've got a problem with Spurn has got a series of sandbars just off the mouth. They're known as the dread of the Humber, and we call it today the Binks. Thousands of sailors' ships have come to grief on this series of sandbanks over the hundreds of years that people have been sailing up and down the coast. The coast off here was like the M1 in medieval times, and so there was a need for some kind of coastal safety. And the second lighthouse ever to be built in modern Britain in 1427 was built by Richard Reed Barrow. He petitioned the king at the time, and he built a lighthouse on Spurn. Later lighthouses were built by another family. Was it Smeaton, yeah, we've got Smeaton there as well. So Smeaton's lighthouse. Hang on, wrong one. You can see that just there. Move my thing. There's Smeaton's lighthouse. So Smeaton's light was built in 1776, a much more substantial affair, and that helped with guiding the ships around Spurn very, very effectively. And here's a picture with Smeaton's high light, Smeaton's low light, and the rescue of the Thomas by the newly appointed Spurn lifeboat. So you have Spurn lifeboat starting to be placed on Spurn, and that was by the Whole Trinity House, and that was in 1810. So we're moving on quite quickly now. Spurn had some amazing characters on it. Here's Wells Kendall Powditch. He was a lighthouse keeper at Smeaton's Light for a number of years in the 1800s, and we've got a picture of this gentleman in the lighthouse, which we currently have on site. Smeaton's Light was taken down soon after the current lighthouse was built in 1895. So there was the Spurn rocket crew and lifeboat crew were actually established on Spurn, and these were the houses that they had in the mid-1800s. You notice Spurn Point again, big broad area. These houses were built specifically for the lifeboat crew. Lifeboat crew was initially brought in from Easington and Kilnsea, but they realised it just had such a long time to actually get them down to a rescue, which usually was on the Binks, which is just out off this area of Spurn, that they needed to have people living on the site itself, and so they built some houses for them. And so we've had a long tradition of lifeboats on Spurn. So one of the things that went on Spurn as well was, as Grimsby and Hull increased their trade, they needed ballast for the ships, and that holds the ships down when they're sailing, and then they tip the ballast out when they get a load. And particularly for whaling in Hull, they had to have ballast to take up to the Arctic to go whaling. They tipped the ballast out as they filled up with whale oil and blubber and bone. Bit of a grim sort of history of Spurn, but that's what they needed. They also needed it for building materials, but they actually took 50,000 tons of gravel, sand and gravel, every year, and Spurn only gets fed by erosion about 500 tons of material every year. So it was been actually taken away as ballast and building material. And so Spurn actually breached in the early 1800s, 1820. You see a map here of Spurn with a gap between the end of Spurn and the beginning. There were no roads or railway lines or anything there at that time, and so the water could just wash straight through. And the port authorities thought this couldn't do. Very remote community. There was the lifeboats, the lighthouses there at the time, and they decided to do something about it. So towards the mid-1800s, they decided to start defending Spurn much more. A big storm in 1849 punched 3 holes in Spurn and sort of made one place called Chance Bay. And Chance Bay was where you literally took a chance walking across at low water, because if the tide came in, it could cut you off, and it did to a few people. So they thought, there's going to be a problem. It's going to disturb the anchorage. It's going to disturb the channels in the estuary. So they started defending Spurn, and so it's been artificially defended for a long time, right up until the 50s. It was defended by these groins going out at right angles that catch the sand and build up the beach, and these revetments with chalk behind that actually stop the waves from catching and eroding the sand dunes. So in the towards the turn of the 1900s into the 1900s, we had a brand new lighthouse built at Spurn, and this is the one that we currently have. You notice the curtains closed. It ran all the time. They had to close the curtains during the day, otherwise it would start burning holes in everything. The light was state-of-the-art Victorian lighthouse building. It had sector lights, and so there was 4 lights in the whole of Spurn Lighthouse, and they were really, really good at directing ships around and stopping them from going onto the binks, the dread of the Humber. You've got also a lot of day trippers came down to Spurn at that time. Day trippers, tourism is not a new thing on Spurn. And during this period, you had so many people coming to Spurn that it started to cause a few problems. One of the issues was the little tern colony that had developed on Spurn, because it's such a fantastic place for ground nesting birds. But one of the problems they had was so many people walking around the beaches, playing, that they trampled on the eggs. And so the Yorkshire Naturalist Union at the time, it's around about the late 1800s, they decided to employ somebody to watch the terns. So they had a little tern warden. And so Spurn is one of the first places in the country, alongside Norfolk, to employ people to actually make sure that the little terns are looked after and they can thrive. So that's something really special, and we're starting to get the conservation aspect of Spurn now, not just its history. There's a real conservation movement that started down here. A rare picture of all 3 lighthouses. So you've got Smeaton's Light here, built again 1776. Smeaton's Low Light, built in 1852. That was actually still here on the mud flats or sand flats. Today, it was converted into a water tower after they didn't need it for Smeaton's Lighthouse, and that was after the current lighthouse was built in 1895. That one's decommissioned now, so that was decommissioned in 1985, and it was restored recently and opened as a public tourist attraction on Spurn. So we've got into the 1900s now. You've got the RNLI took over the running of the Spurn Lighthouse. There was issues with the Trinity House running its whole Trinity House that's just on this boat here, and these gentlemen were the lifeboat crew. Amazing that they actually used to row out and rescue people, on the binks in terrible weather conditions. But it was a tough life. But some of them were thinking of leaving. So the RNLI came in, they took over, and they paid the crew as the first full-time paid crew in England. And it's remained that for quite some time. Now there's a couple more, but not at this time. So the RNLI, they invested in infrastructure, a boathouse that was built on stilts with a slide that went out into the estuary, very quick launch, and this stayed for a number of years. It still exists somewhere down on the south coast. It was taken in one go, put on a barge and taken away. You can see the low light just here behind with the water tower on it. This would have been after 1922, this. So they had lots of lifeboat things going on. Moving on into the First World War period. During the First World War and the Second World War, Spurn was militarized, basically. It was completely covered in concrete, lots and lots of gun emplacements put in. This is Bull Sands Fort. You can see one of the gun emplacements here. These are the battlements as well. This was out in the estuary. It was actually built during the Second World War, but really, sorry, the First World War, but really came into its own in the second. You have the railway was built at this time in 1915. They started to build a railway. They built a pier at the point, and the railway actually allowed them to bring all the materials onto Spurn to build the gun emplacements. And they built a place called Green Battery at the point with 2 9.2-inch guns, and they built Godwin Battery up at Kilnsea. And the railway went from the point up to Kilnsea. It didn't go the other way. It was for bringing materials from the sea and using Spurn as a port. Here's one of the locomotives that they actually used on that railway line, and it was used very effectively to transport all the materials for these guns. This is a 9.2-inch gun. similar model to what was down at Spurn in the First World War. And this is a 6-inch gun, which was in place in the Second World War with the twin 6-pounders behind, with very effective armament for stopping surface vessels and capital ships. So they had this amazing array of weaponry to defend the mouth of the Humber. On this map, you can see Bull Sands Fort just here, and you can also see the lighthouse and where the light shone out into the estuary. Also notice that there's a series of breakwaters all the way down Spurn to keep it in place. At this time, the railway went all the way up to Kilnsea, and it was artificially held in place. And they filled in the big gap that developed here, known as Chalk Bank. They filled that in the mid-1800s. This picture is of the Lifeboat Inn. The Lifeboat Inn was a famous watering hole run by the Hopper family. This is the Hopper family down here. Let's see if I can move my picture a little bit more. And they were Mr. Hopper was the coxswain of the lifeboat. At one time, the lifeboat families lived in these cottages here, but these were then they were moved on to the main ones in the mid-1800s. So notice all the chalk used to defend the Lifeboat Inn. This is near to where the lighthouse currently is, for anybody that knows Spurn. It's just about 100 yards further up the peninsula. So you've got a pub on Spurn, the Lifeboat Inn. This is an example of the forts that were out in the estuary. This is a plan of Bull Sands Fort, and there's a picture, a more modern picture of it, and then Hale Sands Fort here, and Bull Sands Fort there. And these actually held a big boom between them to stop submarines getting into the estuary. Rare picture, this one. This one shows you the beach at the point where all the vegetation has been cut back. And this was just soon after the Second World War. And you've got searchlights on the beach, and then you've got the gun emplacements, so as the guns have a clear field of view. Now, after the Second World War, Spurn was noted for its little tern colony on this giant beach. And you can imagine that now is very different to what it was then. But imagine the number of birds that would have nested on that beach. This is a 1960s aerial shot showing you how it's vegetated up. This is where the guns are. This is where the searchlights are. That was all beach. Now it's scrub. It's mostly sea buckthorn, and then the beach has developed on this side. Shows you all the barracks and the lifeboat station and the naval pier. And then there was a road placed on Spurn in 1940. So it superseded the railway. The railway was still there, but it was a road that was the main connection. There's an example of the road. You've got the lifeboat houses and the school. Spurn did have a school. It had quite a community. You had the lifeboat families. You had the military people that were here, coast guards, lighthouse keepers. This is the lookout. They looked out to see whether there was any ships in trouble, and signal station here as well. And look at all the military buildings that are on Spurn. It was absolutely covered in them. So it's very different now. So after the wars, you're moving on to calmer times, and we've got here the Swift, which is an emblem of the Spurn Bird Observatory. And Spurn Bird Observatory was established in 1946, and they lots of scientific study, ringing birds, also recording a lot more of the wildlife on Spurn as well. Not just birds, but Spurn is particularly famous for its bird life and its migration. Because it's a migration spot, it's very good for ringing birds. They catch the birds, put a ring on, a coded ring on, bird is released, and wherever it's recaptured is called a control, and that then is sent to the Natural History Museum and recorded. And it's been very, very important for migrating birds numbers, studying international movements and populations. We've got some birders here. Spurn is extremely popular with birders. It's what we call a birding mecca, and lots of photographers now, because of digital cameras, you can just take a shot straight away, no problem, using the scopes and the binoculars. But it's Spurn is an amazing place now. It's calmed right down. You've got other wildlife on Spurn. You've got your marine wildlife. There's a flounder common in the estuary. We have lots and lots of different marine life on Spurn. You've got your pyramidal orchid, which bursts into life in late June, and we have meadows on Spurn. Lots and lots of different habitats. We've got scrub, but we graze it as well to make sure the meadows are in pristine condition for the flowering season. Lots and lots of different flowering communities. And strangely enough, in 1957, Spurn was designated as a site of special scientific interest for its flora, not for its birds. Its birds have had protection later on. We've got a flight of dunlin here. Spurn is really, really known for its sheer numbers of birds coming through, particularly the autumn migration. You've got lots and lots of thrushes, lots and lots of sometimes quite rare birds coming through. But I particularly like the numbers, the sheer numbers of birds. And you can have up to 15,000 knot just feeding on the mudflats inside Spurn Bight. We have some of the bigger fluffy animals as well. We have roe deer that come down onto the site. Sometimes they commute. I've seen them swimming onto Spurn across the estuary. So they generally walk down the beach, and they graze on the site. And they sometimes, we've seen young there as well. So they are breeding on Spurn. Brent geese. The Brent geese come down in the autumn from as far away as Russia. And they actually come down and feed on the eel grass that's inside Spurn Bight, and they also go up onto the fields. And there's up to 4,000 plus of these beautiful geese come down. And of course, we've got a common seal, and we have a grey seal as well. The common seal is often found on the inside of Spurn, and they feed all around on the abundant supply of fish. So you've got, moving on, we've got Spurn developing into a nature reserve. It was purchased in 1960 by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. It was the Yorkshire Naturalist Trust at the time, and it became the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust with the help of the Yorkshire Naturalists Union and the Spurn Bird Observatory. So this group got together and thought, let's preserve this place. It was threatened with development into a caravan site or possibly even a butlins. And it was been abused at the time. People were not treating it correctly, so they needed to have some protection. And so it was purchased for £1,500. So quite a snip, really. So that was the really good news for the wildlife on Spurn. It then moved into a time when there's lots of other things happened. Spurn became a heritage coast in 1988. And then it's designated with lots of protections of Ramsar site, a special protection area, and also a national nature reserve in 1994. And this is where the first warden, and one of the few wardens on Spurn, I think there's been two, Barry Spence, that was his house. And it was an old military base. This was an anti-aircraft gun emplacement, and these were the barracks. So this is where Spurn Bird Observatory had a dormitory for birders that came and did ringing and stayed at the site. Over the side there's Warren Cottage, and then there's a Nissen hut here used for storage and a garage. So this is all gone now because with the developments and rewilding of Spurn, these buildings have been removed because they were flooded in 2013. And that brings us on to the tidal surge of 2013. It was quite a dramatic change on Spurn and really the game changer. Previous to this, there was a road that went all the way down to the point. You paid a fee at the gate, at the warren, and then you could go onto Spurn, and people could roam around all day. A very convenient way to get to the end. That all changed on December the 5th, 2013. Massive storm came down the North Sea with 80-mile-an-hour northwesterly winds, and it punched a hole through the narrow neck of Spurn, already starting to get eroded quite badly with previous storms. But this was the one that actually took away the road. It took away the water supply and the electricity as well. So at the point, there were not just the RNLI, but you had the port authorities had a jetty which they built in the 70s, and that was for the pilotage that went out. The pilot boats went out and took the ships up and down, guided the ships up and down the estuary. They realised that they no longer had access, so they moved off to Grimsby in the following year. You notice the whole area was so badly damaged, changed by the surge, 2 meters on top of a large tide with a 12-foot swell as well. So it came through at quite a rate, and it did make quite a mess. And here we have an example of the water coming through what was then the breach. Now we call it the washover because it's actually a washover. It's not a breach. It's not permanent water. It only does this occasionally. We've got a group of volunteers who valiantly went out and tidied up the tremendous amount of waste that came up on the beach, mostly plastic, of course. And plastic is one of our key sort of enemies of the environment at the moment. We're trying to sort of get as much plastic out of the ocean as possible. So these people did their bit, and it's ongoing today. We still collect up plastic every single day. And this lady came down, spent a whole week and collected 2 tons, her and her son, 2 tons of plastic waste off Spurn a few years back. And that's one of the real heroes of the modern sort of conservation movement, to get this plastic out of the sea. So getting a bit more to modern times, I'm not sure about what time I've got left. We had
a couple of minutes, Andy.
Couple of minutes, thank you. We had the restoration of the lighthouse. This was thanks to the Heritage Lottery scheme and Heritage Lottery Fund. And that's where I came into the picture in a way, because I was employed after Harry, who'd done all the groundwork for it. I was employed to actually get the lighthouse restored and have events and interpretation of Spurn. So this whole project, funded over 3 years, allowed us to have the lighthouse restored, repainted, reglazed, sealed up, and opened to the public. We opened it in 2016. The Unimog, this vehicle here, was part of the recovery fund after the surge. We needed a vehicle to get across the washover. What better than a giant 4x4 ex-army truck? And it had a special back fitted so as we could take guests and volunteers down to do work, and also to show people Spurn in what we call the Spurn Safari. And it seems to be very successful. People have really taken to it. But at the end of the day, we're here to look after the birds as well. And the best way to do that is to educate people, to actually tell people about them, let them see them in a controlled way so that they don't disturb the birds and actually destroy the very thing that they've come to look at. So here we have a group of waders marching out with the tide. They need to have no disturbance. They need to have a lot of mud to actually roam on, and we try and make sure that they are. We patrol the site. We keep dogs off Spurn because dogs running around in the mud on mud flats tend to put the birds off. And if you scare those birds off there, you're as good as shooting them because you're reducing their survival chances. We still have the lifeboat crew down at Spurn. They're still there, 6 days on, 6 days off. The lifeboat families moved off in 2012 before the surge, but we have a good relationship with them, and long may that last because they save a lot of lives. We've got military tours. We've developed the military heritage of Spurn, and looking at all this old concrete that was left and interpreting it and telling people about it. Very popular. Military archaeology is extremely popular now. Public engagement, telling people about the wildlife, the habitats present, and volunteers. Looking after our volunteers at this barbecue. We have a lot of lighthouse volunteers, practical volunteers, people who come and check your stock and the sheep and things like that. And they are the lifeblood of both the Trust and Spurn. We couldn't do it without them, absolutely not. These little fellas are our little land managers, our Hebridean sheep. So they graze the meadows and the grassed areas to try and stop it from just becoming a whole lot of rank scrub, and that helps the wildflowers to come through in the spring and summer. So they help with the management of the reserve. Some more modern projects. We've got one here. The lesser eelgrass is actually quite a colony at Spurn. It's expanding, getting more and more. We do have a protection scheme for this, and the current project is to actually make this even more effective, and it's partly to do with the oyster project as well. So we actually have an native oyster reintroduction program on Spurn, looking at aquaculture as well. But these little fellows used to be all over the Humber. And they were more or less died out in the 1950s, and now we've brought them back as part of the Humber Oyster Project. So finally, we've got the new Discovery Centre at Spurn. Spurn is called the Gateway Site. It has up to 50,000 visitors or more each year in a normal year, not a COVID year, but it's a facility that we can now use to engage people and send them off on their journey along Spurn. So anyway, I've finished up now. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand over to Bex, and we'll see about some questions.
Fab, thank you, Andy. That was absolutely fascinating. I have to admit that while I know quite a bit about the ecology at Spurn, I definitely didn't have much of a clue about the historical importance of Spurn and everything that's going on there. Really fascinated to hear about the links to whaling through the ballast provision for the ships, and that there was a gap once before in the peninsula back in 1820. So really fascinating. We've got some questions that have come in. So the first one's a toughie from David, who asks, is Spurn vulnerable to sea level rise?
I expect so. You know, I think every coastal place is going to be vulnerable to sea level rise. If you look at that first, well, one of the first slides I put on, Doggerland, 8,000 years ago, there was land that went right the way across to Holland, and that land now is under the sea. It's a sunken, land. So yes, it is definitely going to happen. I remember a few years back going and actually looking at a model at Hull University, and like one of these virtual models, and you could put in the amount of sea level rise, and it showed you what would happen to the Humber area. A bit scary, but it did show that basically Spurn may well become a bar or a reef, but we don't know when. It's all surmising. It could become this, or it might just build up as a beach anyway and just keep building up. Because it does build up, it becomes a broad beach, and technically Spurn should be a bar going all the way across or part way across the Humber. But because the Humber's a macrotidal estuary, it actually pushes sand back out of the estuary and keeps it open and stops Spurn from going all the way across. But it could end up as a bar. We don't know. It's one of those things which we just have to go with. And we'll say that Spurn is all about change. It's all about things happening all the time. Every single tide it changes. And like, for instance, last Saturday, tremendous wind, probably a few hundred tons of sand were moved on Spurn alone in that one afternoon. It's like, you have so many lorry loads of sand moved in one afternoon by the elements. And that's what I love about it.
Absolutely. So it's really, it's clear that, Spurn is going to continue to change, perhaps more quickly than we might like, given, the impact of sea level rise. But, thinking about the trust's activities more broadly, here in Yorkshire, but also, across the country, a big part of our work is about mitigating for climate change, of course, and making sure that we, make sure that change is as small as we can possibly make it, and do our bit towards contributing towards that. So yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things with climate change is that animals need to be able to move somewhere. They need to have somewhere to go, and by rewilding or making more accommodation for wildlife, if Spurn does get inundated, at least we know that the wildlife might move elsewhere if it's allowed to. If you put a great big bank in, it's not going to actually move. Hence, they are doing managed retreat projects further up the Humber. So we're all for that. It's kind of like, because the area of Holderness used to be a giant marshland. It was drained, by Mr. Vermeulen and his friends in the 1700s, 1800s, and that's what it has become, what it has become now. But it may well go back to marshland in the future.
Absolutely. So changing subjects completely, Chester York asks, why did we need another lighthouse? What was wrong with the Smeaton High?
That's quite a story, that. Smeaton's highlight was a brilliant lighthouse. John Smeaton was a brilliant engineer, came from Leeds, Yorkshireman. So he actually had built it on oak piles. And because it was on oak piles, the oak piles have started to rot and settle, and it started to literally wobble in the wind. And so it was either demolish it and rebuild, or they put the picture you saw had sort of stays on it, big timber stays, and that was obviously a later picture because it was starting to topple. So they needed to build a new one, and technology had moved on with the lights, the sector lights, and so they thought, let's build a brand new lighthouse with all of the good technology in it, and then we'll get rid of the old one. It was just it's change again. It was modern technology taking over.
Absolutely, thank you. And Chester asks another question, which is in regards to the road. So, he asked if we'd be in favour of reinstating the road. Would we ever look to do that now that it's disappeared after the storm in 2013?
Well, the road's a strange one because it was placed there by the military in 1940 after the railway was placed there by the military in 1915. So it's not that long that Spurn has had a transport net point to the point. The thing is, you got to ask is, what are you putting the road in for? Why are you putting the road in? Are you putting it in so as people can drive to the point? Well, what's the purpose in that? Is that so as people can just get out and have a nice view? You've got to think, why are you putting the road in? And it's the only reason why the road was ever put there was because of a world war. Well, we haven't got a world war. Thank goodness. It isn't a military strategic site. The only people that put the road in are the military. They had the finances to do it. And I don't know if it would actually be good use of charitable funds to actually put a road in for someone to go and have a nice view. So
essentially, we don't need a road as things stand. No. The RLNI can access the point.
Yeah.
Obviously, the pilots don't go off the Spurn point at this point in time, and there's no benefit to the wildlife, basically.
No,
and that's what our role is there as stewards.
Is to look after the wildlife. It's not to make it so that people can, or whatever, can get to the point on a metalled road. And the thing is, it would cost a huge amount of money to actually put a road in, but if somebody would give us, £100 million specifically for that, fair dues. But I don't know if anybody's going to give that money specifically for that thing to a charity to actually put a road in. I always say, there's a spade, mate, get going.
So Dawn asks, thinking about the historical importance of the site and the way that it was used, Dawn asked about the guns on Spurn and whether they were ever fired in anger in either of the wars. Do you know much about that?
We don't know about the large guns being fired in anger, the 9.2-inch guns. I don't think they ever were, because there's no recorded evidence of a ship being shot at by those guns, or even the 6-pounders or the 6-inch guns. But we do know that they definitely used the anti-aircraft guns, and they actually brought some planes down with them. So they definitely had the 4-inch. There's a 3.7-inch anti-aircraft gun that was used, and that was, strange enough, that was placed on top of the previous green battery, which was one of the First World War guns. So they actually used the Second World War, the First World War gun emplacement to put Second World War modern technology onto them. So again, change, repurposing, and putting those guns on. And yeah, they were definitely used in anger, and so were the searchlights, but not, to my knowledge, none of the big guns. But the big guns, when they went off, apparently they had to have all the windows open on site, so that the shockwave would go through the buildings and not smash the windows. So there must have been tremendous things to go off, and certainly would have scared the wildlife a bit. So, but the wildlife at that time was absolutely thriving, because, as you know, with most military sites, they're left alone. They're not disturbed. It's disturbance by us and other things that actually can cause more of a problem to wildlife. The Spurn now has become more remote, so disturbance is less. So it must be good for the wildlife.
And presumably, with the exception of when those guns were being fired, of course, at that point, as you say, it would have been very quiet. And it's a bit like the site just a little bit further down the coast at Donanook that Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust look after and own, where we have thousands of grey seals hauling out.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's a perfect spot for them, isn't it? Because they're not disturbed there, essentially. And actually have become quite habituated to the aircrafts that, or the way that site is used by the military now.
Yeah, the military are very good with the wildlife as well, aren't they? They're very they tend not to do stuff when there's the breeding season, but yeah, they look over the shoulder and go, "Oh look, another bomb going off." So
they have become habituated to that, apparently.
Yeah.
So I was told in my last visit. So Jan asks about the cottages and the buildings, if there's any of those left. What's still on Spurn? What can you see?
There's the cottages were the ones with the school. They were demolished in the 70s, I believe, mid-70s. And the new houses that are at the point, they were built around about 1975, alongside the jetty. We have got a lot of old military bunkers and tunnels and buildings still on site. You know, there was a lot of demolition went on in the 70s. Strangely enough, a lot of the material that was taken down from the demolishing of the buildings was used to reinforce Spurn in an effort to protect it from the North Sea. So there was an effort at that time, and it's only after the Coastal Management Zone strategy was published in the 90s that Spurn became part of the let's do a sort of kind of like a do nothing approach to stopping the sea from coming in. And actually it does modify, it changes. You know, you get sort of like things washed away, so to speak, but then deposition means that they grow elsewhere and new things can grow, pioneer species can grow, and that's exactly what Spurn should be doing.
Absolutely. So on your first slide, Andy, you showed an aerial view of Spurn, and you talked about a few of the different areas that could be seen. One was called Greedy Gut.
Yeah.
How did it get that name?
I don't know, but there's some fantastic names like Old Den, Greedy Gut, White Bite, Spurn Warren, Kilnsey Warren. There's the Binks, the Dread of the Humber. I like Cornu valleys, you know, like horn at the end of the valley. But I'm not quite sure the origin of Greedy Gut, but it was a channel. And Greedy Gut joined on to Trinity Channel, which actually I was saying today to some people that it used to actually join all the way around Spurn Bight, this channel. So ships would have come down this channel around Spurn Bight, probably in the 1500s, somewhere around there. So you'd have had
Oh, wow.
Strangely enough, rather than them being off the point, they would have been coming along Spurn on the inside. And that was a shipping channel. It's silted up now, it's gone. But there's still the remnants of it, just at the point. You can see it just pointing up towards Sunk Island. So the channels in the Humber have changed quite dramatically over the millennia, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that the Humber estuary, it's changing all the time on a daily basis, isn't it, in terms of exactly where the sandbanks are, etc. And the pilots have to navigate, that movement of huge quantities of sediment in the estuary every single day. It's shifting so rapidly all the time. And there's 40,000 ship movements into the Humber estuary every year, isn't there?
Yeah.
Really important port, but definitely something that needs maintaining from that point of view because of that huge amount of movement that's going on.
Well, that's where it's like Spurn acts as a natural barrier and a soft sort of engineering barrier to the North Sea. If Spurn wasn't there, the waves would come clean through and hit Grimsby. So Grimsby would have an issue. So it would change the thing. It's not going to, because the longshore drift bringing material down the coast from the eroding Holderness coast actually keeps Spurn fed with up to 500 tons of material every year. So that's why when you go down Spurn, you see what was a very narrow washover back in 2013 now is about 300 meters across this huge beach. And that's what is stabilizing Spurn in many ways. It's just a lot of material to move. Spurn doesn't actually wash away; it just moves and then it goes offshore, then comes back. And anybody that knows about destructive and constructive waves, your constructive waves build it up, your destructive waves take it away.
Bringing me right back to my A-level geography there, Andy.
Yeah.
But you've answered one of my other questions, was whether Spurn actually does move or not. So that's really, really fascinating to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is probably a good question for us both, actually. But Sue asks if there's any cetacean, so that's whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Is there any cetacean watches from the point, or is it not suitable for any reason?
We do have some of your volunteers who actually watch from the Warren. So Anne comes down occasionally and watches from the Warren, and we, the Spurn Bird Observatory, they watch for cetaceans as well. So there's a watch there. We don't actually watch from the point because you don't really see that much. You see porpoises from the point, definitely a lot of those, particularly in May, springtime. But porpoises are all. If you've seen them at the point, you've definitely seen them at the Warren as well. We have had a few unfortunate wash-ups of minke whales, and we've had dolphins spotted off. We've had minke whales spotted offshore as well. But we do get the cetacean watch there. We want more this last year. We wanted to really get it going this last year, didn't we? And obviously COVID interrupted with that.
Yeah, definitely. We always need. More people watching from down at Spurn. As Andy says, we've got some people, but we don't have as many volunteers down that kind of Holderness coast area. There's some very dedicated volunteers that are serving down there, but we can always do with more. So if anyone is interested, then get in contact, because we've got a course coming up on the 6th of March. So would be great to get you involved. We always need more recording going on down at Spurn in regards to the cetaceans, for sure. So you mentioned, Andy, in your talk about things washing up, you talked about the wrecks, and you showed that the picture of the mammoth tusk. Some of these artifacts that are washing up, where are they? Can people come and visit them? Are these all available somewhere?
Yeah, the mammoth tusk, that's displayed in the Discovery Room at Spurn, at the Discovery Centre. So we're just in the process of revamping that. So that will be available for people to come and have a look at. And it's quite popular. People come, somebody I think we're having a meeting in there one day, and somebody was most disgruntled that they couldn't come and have a look at the tusk. So we kind of like stopped the meeting and let them in. so
Absolutely, yeah.
it was
if I'd come all that way, I'd want to see
yeah,
it
and
as
they had
well.
come a long way. They'd specifically come for this this mammothus. We've found another one as well. So we've got two, but this one's much smaller. The other one that was donated. We found mammoth teeth, and we find a lot of fossils on Spurn, and we've got an ox bone and things like that. Some things we have a peat bed just down again, just down at the washover. And occasionally some interesting things get washed out of the peat beds. Again, that peat bed will have been there for 20,000 years, possibly. We don't quite know. You know, it could be 13,000, but certainly when it was way inland, you know, it would have been way inland, a freshwater marsh.
Wow, plenty to see then.
Yeah.
In the way of wildlife and in history and you know, things that have washed up on the beach back in the visitor centre as well then.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was wondering about, you've talked an awful lot about how much Spurn changes, and obviously it's relatively multi-purpose even without that road being there, and certainly of course from our point of view it's a huge nature destination. So in that respect, what's the biggest challenges in looking after Spurn as a nature reserve for wildlife and for people?
I suppose distance access is an issue, but the things today, for instance, we were having a task. We were looking after the point area, clearing some scrub, so it allows light in to get to the understory and create more of a mosaic of habitats on Spurn. Spurn is mainly sand dunes. They're not fully developed sand dunes. It's just a sand dune system, but it's not your dune slacks and your freshwater pools and things like that. We never get that. There is no fresh water on Spurn, no standing water. So we don't have the full sort of like dune systems like they have on the South Bank. But we do have sand dunes. It is designated for that as well. We've got to be very careful what we do with sand dunes on Spurn. Mostly marron grass, but then further in you've got chalk bank, which was again slightly artificial because Spurn has been really fiddled around with, and they brought thousands of tons of chalk down from further up the estuary, up near the Humber Bridge, dumped that in to make banks to actually warp the area to make sure that the land built up. And what you've got there is you've got a chalk calcareous coastal grassland, which is quite unusual. And so we managed that. We managed the area known as the potato fields. The potato fields a bit further down than the chalk bank. That's where they actually had their allotments, and there's still the outlines of these field systems that they had, because they grew a lot of their own food right up until the early part of the 1900s. And so that area's got a special sort of feature about it. We found, you know, lots of pyramidal orchids in there. So you've got a lot of sea buckthorn on Spurn, and that is brilliant for its migrating birds when the berries are there, and that's something we'll maybe talk about in a minute. When the berries actually are there on the sea buckthorn, it's a massive feeding station for all these thrushes, particularly thrushes, redwings, blackbirds, song thrushes, and so on, fieldfare, that come across from Scandinavia in the autumn, and they see Spurn as a feeding station as well as a landfall. So we've got sea buckthorn. You've also got the salt marsh, a little bit of salt marsh at the beginning of Spurn. Then you've got the eelgrass beds further down into Spurn Bight, White Bight, and then you've got the mudflats themselves. Mudflats, absolutely a massive larder, 800 different individual animals in 1 square meter of mudflat. And we do a thing called Mud Magic in the summer. We go out and have a look at these mudflats, find out what animals live in them, and you'll be amazed at how many different types of invertebrate live in the mud of the Humber, and hence it creates a massive feeding zone for the waders that are over
so on
winter
that
here.
note then,
yeah.
Last final question before we wrap up. Chester asked if you and Adam hope to run more safaris and birding days this summer and autumn.
Well, again, it's Boris has a final word on that one, but we are definitely hoping to do more safaris, and we do the bespoke birding tours, which prove very popular. And if you want to find out about the birds at Spurn, that's one of the ones to go on. But safaris, they tell you the history, the bits and pieces, and see what wildlife we can find, because Spurns are strange, but it can be quite fickle. Sometimes absolutely amazing with birds everywhere. Well, I remember we had Look North down, and they came to look at the bird migration. Well, it was one of those days when it was a westerly wind and there wasn't any bird migration. So it can be, but the next day, the wind turned around to the east and there were thousands of birds, and we said should have come the day after. It's just one of those places. So we look
the way
for
it
different
goes.
things. Yeah. And we hopefully come in the spring, you'll get your spring migration, you see your first chiff chaff, you see your first willow warbler, you see I love to see my first wheatear, and then of course first swallow. So you've got that, then you've got your flowers and your butterflies in the summer. And that is absolutely amazing. It smells like a perfume factory, does Spurn, in the summer. It's just amazing. And your autumn, of course, your autumn migration, fall, bit of cloud, bit of rain, bit of drizzle with an easterly wind, boom. It's absolutely fantastic.
So basically, plenty to be seen. And the answer is that, assuming that we can, under the guidelines at the time, we will be running plenty more.
We've just got the Unimog back from the MOT in service, so it's all ready and raring to go. All we need now is the green light from everybody else, and hopefully we'll beat this horrible pandemic and start to get out and enjoy ourselves.
Brilliant. That's fantastic, Andy. Thank you so much for telling us all about Spurn. It really has been fascinating. I've learned a lot myself this evening, so I hope everyone else has. I think you've really highlighted the importance of this site for wildlife, of course, especially as a local, regional and national and international hotspot for birds. It's clear that Spurn has always been and will continue to change its community, its wildlife, its weather, its migration patterns. And such an important site for the trust, and just wonderful that we get to be stewards of such a dynamic and fantastic spot for wildlife. So I think we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you to everyone who's listened in, especially those that have sent in a comment or a question. It's really great to have you with us. And of course, we hope that you'll join us for the next talk. So the next talk is going to be on Wednesday, the 17th of March, between 7 and 8 as normal. And we're going to be hearing from Colin Speedy. He's going to talk to us a little bit about disturbance to marine wildlife at sea, what that looks like, why it's important to reduce it, and a little bit about his scheme and how that he's designed and how that helps sea users to reduce disturbance. As is always the case, we will send you a notification just prior to the talk as a reminder, with all the links that you need to join the talk. You can email questions in advance if you want, or you can just pop them in the chat on the evening. Do always send us your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, anything. We're really happy to receive them. I know some people gave us some feedback after the last talk. They're interested in hearing about a little bit more about fishing locally and the implications of Brexit. And we're going to address that in a future talk. So if you've got any suggestions for talks, then please do let us know. We'd love to hear about them. And of course, please do share the talk series with others if you think there's other people that would like to listen. When Andy was talking, he mentioned earlier about seagrass and oyster projects that are happening in the Humber. We're going to be talking about both of those subjects in separate talks later this year. So at some point, we'll put them up on the website with the relevant date. So watch out for those. There'll be really fascinating talks as well by some of our staff members. So I think I'll leave it there. So thanks again for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you all again in a month's time for the next talk. Thank you.